The Martinez family's last morning in Phoenix began before dawn, with the sound of coffee brewing and the rustle of packing tape being pulled across cardboard boxes. Maria Martinez stood in her kitchen, watching the sunrise paint the Sonoran desert in shades of gold and pink through her window. At 34, she had learned to find beauty in endings, but leaving Phoenix felt different. This wasn't just another military transfer like the ones that had defined her childhood. This was their choice, their chance to build something permanent. "Mom, I can't find Mr. Bear anywhere." 8-year-old Sophia's voice carried down the hallway, punctuated by the sound of drawers being yanked open and closed. Maria smiled despite her exhaustion. They'd been packing for 3 weeks, but somehow Sophia's treasured stuffed animal had vanished in the chaos. "Check the car again, mija," Maria called back, securing the lid on a cooler filled with sandwiches, juice boxes, and the homemade cookies Sophia had insisted on bringing to their new home. The 3-hour drive to Flagstaff would be the last leg of a journey that had begun 2 months earlier when Carlos received the call that changed everything. Carlos Martinez, 36, had been teaching high school mathematics at South Mountain High for 8 years when Flagstaff Unified School District offered him a position as department head. The salary increase would finally allow them to buy a house instead of renting, and the mountain town promised clean air, smaller classes, and a community where they could raise their children away from the urban sprawl that seemed to consume more of Phoenix each year. "Oil's fresh, tires are good, coolant topped off," Carlos announced, emerging from the garage with grease-stained fingers and the satisfied expression he wore whenever he'd completed a mechanical task. His methodical approach to everything, from balancing their checkbook to planning family vacations, had initially frustrated Maria when they first married. Now, after 14 years together, she found comfort in his reliability. "We should make it to Flagstaff by 2 p.m. if we leave within the hour." Their son Diego, 12, was already slumped in the back seat of their silver Honda Pilot, earbuds firmly in place and a scowl that had become his default expression since they'd announced the move. Leaving Phoenix meant abandoning his friends, his spot on the middle school chess team, and the skateboard park where he'd finally mastered the halfpipe. He'd barely spoken to his parents for weeks, communicating primarily through dramatic sighs and eye rolls. The moving truck had departed at 6 a.m., driven by a cheerful man named Pete, who'd promised to have their belongings delivered and waiting by noon. 16 years of marriage, 2 children, and countless memories were packed into that truck. Photo albums, Carlos's guitar, Maria's easel and paints, Diego's chess trophies, Sophia's growing collection of stuffed animals. Everything that made their house a home was rolling north on Interstate 17, waiting for them to arrive and transform another building into their sanctuary. Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor, emerged from her house as they loaded the last bags into the Honda. She'd been watering her garden, a daily ritual that had remained constant throughout the 8 years the Martinez family had lived next door. "You drive safely now," she called, waving her gardening glove. "And don't forget to send pictures of the new house." Maria hugged her neighbor goodbye, fighting back tears. Mrs. Chen had been more than a neighbor. She'd been a grandmother figure to the children, always ready with homemade cookies and patient ears for their stories. Leaving meant severing connections that had taken years to build. "I found Mr. Bear," Sophia announced triumphantly, clutching the worn brown teddy bear that had been her constant companion since she was 3. "He was hiding under my pillow." Carlos performed his final safety check, testing the lights, examining the tires, and verifying that their emergency kit was properly stocked. Military training had taught him to prepare for contingencies, and fatherhood had amplified that instinct. The Honda Pilot was loaded with water bottles, snacks, a first aid kit, jumper cables, and a paper map of Arizona, backup for the GPS that had occasionally failed them in the past. At 11:47 a.m. on September 15, 2014, the Martinez family pulled out of their driveway for the last time. Mrs. Chen waved from her garden, and Maria waved back through the passenger window, watching their old life disappear in the side mirror. The house that had sheltered their dreams for 8 years grew smaller until it vanished entirely, swallowed by the sprawling Phoenix landscape. Traffic was light as they made their way to Interstate 17, the major artery connecting Phoenix to Flagstaff. Carlos had planned their departure to avoid the rush-hour crush, and the road stretched ahead of them, empty and inviting. Sophia chattered excitedly about her new school, her new room, and the friends she was certain she'd make. Diego remained silent, his music providing a soundtrack to his sullen mood. Their last confirmed sighting came at 12:23 p.m., captured by security cameras at a Chevron station in Cave Creek. The footage showed Carlos pumping gas while Maria went inside with the children. The cashier, a college student named Ashley, later remembered Sophia asking for a pack of gum and Diego complaining about the heat. It was an ordinary interaction, unremarkable, except for the fact that it was the last time anyone would see the Martinez family alive. When Carlos didn't answer his phone Tuesday evening, Rebecca Hartwell, principal of Flagstaff High School, assumed he'd been delayed by moving day complications. Teachers often arrived later than expected, exhausted by the logistics of relocating their lives. She left a voicemail welcoming him to the school and confirming their Wednesday morning meeting. When Wednesday's meeting time came and went without Carlos appearing, Rebecca called again. The phone rang endlessly before going to voicemail. She contacted the district office, thinking perhaps there had been a miscommunication about his start date. The personnel director confirmed that Carlos Martinez was expected to begin work immediately, but no one had heard from him. Meanwhile, in Phoenix, Maria's sister Elena was growing increasingly concerned. Maria had promised to call the moment they arrived in Flagstaff, excited to share details about their new home and the children's reactions to their new bedrooms. When Tuesday evening passed without word, Elena assumed they'd been too tired to call. When Wednesday morning brought continued silence, worry began gnawing at her chest. Elena Martinez Chen, 31, had been Maria's closest confidant since childhood. 3 years younger than her sister, she'd followed Maria's lead in everything from career choices to parenting styles. When Maria married Carlos, Elena had been maid of honor. When Diego was born, Elena was the first person Maria called from the hospital. The silence felt wrong, like a discordant note in a familiar melody. At 10 a.m. Wednesday, Elena called the Flagstaff house the Martinez family was supposed to be renting. The phone rang unanswered. She tried Carlos's cell phone, Maria's cell phone, even Diego's phone. All went straight to voicemail. Growing desperate, she called the moving company. "Oh yeah, the Martinez delivery," Pete the driver told her. "Got there right on schedule Tuesday afternoon, but nobody was home. I waited 2 hours like I'm supposed to, then brought the truck back to the depot. Happens sometimes. People get delayed, have car trouble, change their minds. The stuff's still on the truck if they want it." Elena's hands shook as she hung up. Maria would never leave their belongings sitting on a truck. She was obsessively organized, the type of person who confirmed appointments twice and arrived everywhere 15 minutes early. Something was wrong. At 2:17 p.m. on September 16, 2014, Elena called 911 from the empty rental house in Flagstaff. She'd driven the 3 hours north, hoping to find some simple explanation for her sister's absence. Instead, she found an empty house, uncollected mail, and a growing sense of dread that felt like ice in her stomach. The Arizona Department of Public Safety launched a missing persons investigation immediately. 4 people don't simply vanish without trace, especially a family with 2 young children and established routines. The initial search focused on the route between Phoenix and Flagstaff, with particular attention to Interstate 17, the most direct path between the 2 cities. Detective Ray Hutchins, a 23-year veteran of the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, took charge of the investigation. At 51, he'd worked hundreds of missing persons cases, but families with children always hit him hardest. He had grandchildren Diego and Sophia's ages, and their school photos on Elena's phone reminded him of his own family's treasured moments. "We're treating this as a high-priority case," Hutchins told Elena during their first meeting. 4 people don't disappear without leaving some kind of trail. We'll find them." The search began systematically. Highway patrol officers drove every mile of Interstate 17, examining the shoulders for signs of an accident or breakdown. Helicopters from the Department of Public Safety flew the route, their pilots scanning for any sign of a silver Honda Pilot. The initial search covered a 50-mile radius from the most direct route between Phoenix and Flagstaff. On September 19, 2014, 3 days after the family was reported missing, search and rescue volunteers found the Honda Pilot. The vehicle had left Interstate 17, approximately 40 miles north of Phoenix, taking the exit toward Bloody Basin Road, a rough dirt track that wound through some of Arizona's most remote and inhospitable terrain. The car had traveled nearly 8 miles on the primitive road before leaving the track entirely, rolling down a steep embankment and coming to rest against a cluster of mesquite trees in a ravine. Recovery teams rappelled into the ravine, expecting to find the worst. Instead, they found a mystery that would haunt them for nearly a decade. The Honda Pilot was empty. The abandoned Honda Pilot told a story, but it was a story with missing chapters. Forensic specialists swarmed the crash site, documenting every detail with photographs, measurements, and careful notation. The vehicle had clearly tumbled down the 30-foot embankment, its roof dented and passenger sides scraped by rocks and vegetation. But the damage was moderate, survivable, according to accident reconstruction experts. Inside the vehicle, investigators found a scene that suggested normalcy interrupted. Maria's purse sat in the passenger seat, her wallet containing $127 in cash and all her credit cards untouched. Carlos's phone was wedged under the driver's seat, its battery dead but otherwise undamaged. A half-eaten ham sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil lay on the center console next to an empty juice box. Sophia's coloring book was open to a page of purple flowers, crayons, scattered across the back seat. Most puzzling was the positioning of the car itself. All 4 doors were unlocked, and the front windows were rolled down. If the family had been injured in the crash, they'd apparently been conscious enough to open the doors and exit the vehicle. But where had they gone? Detective Hutchins studied the evidence with growing bewilderment. Skid marks on Bloody Basin Road showed where Carlos had braked hard before leaving the track. The pattern suggested he'd swerved to avoid something, an animal, debris, or another vehicle. But why was the family on Bloody Basin Road at all? The rough track was used primarily by off-road enthusiasts and hunters, not families moving to new homes. Search teams spread out from the crash site like ripples from a stone thrown in still water. Volunteers on foot, horseback, and ATVs combed the desert in ever-widening circles. The Arizona National Guard provided helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras, capable of detecting body heat from hundreds of feet above. Experienced trackers from the Tohono O'odham Nation volunteered their expertise, reading the desert's subtle signs with skills passed down through generations. The September heat was brutal, with daytime temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival experts calculated that adults could live 3 to 5 days without water in such conditions, children even less. Time was running out with each passing hour. Elena arrived at the crash site within hours of the discovery, her face etched with exhaustion and fear. She'd barely slept since reporting her sister's disappearance, sustained by coffee and the desperate hope that each phone call would bring good news. Seeing the mangled Honda Pilot was like looking at a gravestone, proof that something terrible had happened to the family she loved. "They're smart people," she told Detective Hutchins, her voice barely above a whisper. "Carlos was in the military. Maria grew up camping with our father. They would know to stay with the car, to conserve water, to signal for help. They wouldn't just wander off into the desert." But the evidence suggested otherwise. Searchers found no signs of the family near the crash site. No footprints in the sandy soil, no pieces of clothing caught on thorny vegetation, no indication that 4 people had ever stood beside the abandoned Honda Pilot. It was as if they'd simply vanished into the desert air. Theories multiplied as the search expanded. The FBI joined the investigation after receiving reports of increased human trafficking activity along desert smuggling routes. Special Agent Diana Reyes, who specialized in border crimes, brought a different perspective to the case. "Families traveling alone on remote roads are vulnerable," she explained to Elena. "Sometimes Good Samaritans turn out to be predators." Other possibilities emerged as investigators dug deeper. Carlos's military service record showed he'd been trained in survival techniques, Perhaps he'd led his family away from the crash site seeking water or shelter. Maria's art teacher background suggested she might have recognized edible desert plants that could sustain them temporarily. But days of searching revealed no trace of the family, no evidence they'd survived even briefly in the unforgiving landscape. The media seized on the story of the vanished family. Local news stations ran daily updates, their cameras capturing the increasingly desperate search efforts. Sophia's school photo, a gap-toothed smile beneath pigtails, appeared on missing person flyers distributed throughout Arizona. Diego's chess team held a vigil, his empty chair serving as a silent reminder of the boy who'd never arrived at his new school. Psychics called the sheriff's office, claiming to have visions of the family's location. Amateur detectives posted theories on internet forums. UFO enthusiasts pointed to the area's reputation for unexplained phenomena. Each lead was investigated and discarded, adding to the growing pile of false hopes and dead ends. As October arrived and the intense heat began to fade, search efforts gradually scaled back. The initial urgency, driven by the possibility of finding survivors, gave way to the grim reality of recovery. The Martinez family had been missing for over a month, far longer than anyone could survive in the desert without water and shelter. Detective Hutchins continued working the case, but new crimes demanded his attention. The file on the Martinez family grew thicker, with witness statements, search reports, and forensic analyses, but no closer to answers. By November 2014, the active search was officially suspended, though the case remained open, and investigators promised to follow any credible leads. Elena refused to accept the inevitable. She organized her own search parties, recruiting volunteers from her church and Maria's school. They combed the desert on weekends, their hope gradually eroded by the vast emptiness of the landscape. The Sonoran Desert spread endlessly in all directions, its beauty masking countless places where a family might disappear forever. The first year after the disappearance was the hardest. Elena threw herself into the search with obsessive intensity, transforming her dining room into a command center complete with maps, photographs, and timeline charts. She hired 3 different private investigators, each raising her hopes before delivering the same devastating conclusion. The Martinez family had vanished without a trace. Elena's husband, Michael Chen, watched his wife consumed by grief and determination. She'd taken a leave of absence from her job as a social worker, dedicating every waking hour to finding her sister's family. Their own daughter, 10-year-old Amy, struggled to understand why her aunt and cousins were so important that her mother had no time for anything else. "They need me," Elena would say whenever Michael suggested she needed to step back, to accept that the authorities were handling the case. Maria would never stop looking if it were Amy who was missing. The reward fund grew to $75,000 through community donations and fundraising efforts. Elena appeared on local television shows, radio programs, and true crime podcasts, always carrying the same school photos of Diego and Sofia. Her message never varied. "Please don't forget them. Please keep looking." Detective Hutchins maintained regular contact with Elena, calling every few weeks to update her on the case's status. The updates were invariably disappointing. Leads that led nowhere, tips that proved false, witnesses whose stories didn't hold up under scrutiny. But he continued calling because he understood that hope was sometimes all that kept people going in situations like this. "I've been doing this for 25 years, he told Elena during one of their meetings. "I've seen cases solved after decades of no progress. Something will break. Someone will remember something, find something, connect dots that nobody else connected. We don't give up on families." The second year brought a different kind of pain. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a persistent ache that colored everything Elena did. Well-meaning friends suggested she needed to move on and accept reality. Some implied that continuing the search was unhealthy, even selfish. Elena listened to their advice and ignored it completely. She converted the Martinez family's Phoenix house into an informal memorial. Maria's paintings hung on every wall, landscapes of Arizona's deserts and mountains, portraits of her children at various ages, abstract works that seemed to capture the essence of family love. Carlos's guitar sat in the corner, gathering dust but ready for the hands that would never touch it again. The children's rooms remained exactly as they'd been prepared for the move. Beds made, clothes folded, dreams interrupted. Annual memorial walks drew hundreds of participants the first few years, but the crowds gradually thinned as public attention shifted to newer tragedies. Local news stations ran anniversary stories, but the coverage grew shorter and less prominent each year. The Martinez family was becoming a memory, a cautionary tale about the dangers of desert travel. Rather than four people who deserved to be found, Elena's marriage strained under the weight of her obsession. Michael understood her need to search, but he also saw how it was consuming her. Their daughter needed her mother's attention, their relationship needed nurturing, and their life needed to move forward. But Elena couldn't let go of the promise she'd made to Maria years earlier, that she'd always be there for the children, no matter what. "I'm not abandoning them," she told Michael during one of their increasingly frequent arguments. "Everyone else has given up, but I won't. I can't." By the 5th year, even Detective Hutchins had retired, passing the case to younger investigators who viewed it as a cold file rather than an active investigation. The new detectives were professional and sympathetic, but Elena could see in their eyes that they considered the case unsolvable. 4 people don't disappear in the Arizona desert and leave no trace. The assumption was that the Martinez family had died shortly after the crash, their remains claimed by the desert's harsh environment and scavengers. Elena knew the statistics. She'd researched missing persons cases obsessively, learning that the chances of finding someone alive dropped precipitously after the first 48 hours. After 9 years, the odds were essentially zero. But statistics didn't account for the love that connected her to Maria, the promise that bound her to those children, the certainty that somehow, somewhere, answers waited to be discovered. She visited the crash site every year on September 15th, the anniversary of the disappearance. The desert had reclaimed the area, mesquite trees growing taller, new vegetation sprouting where the Honda Pilot had carved its path down the embankment. The memorial cross Elena had placed near the road, a simple wooden structure bearing 4 names, was the only sign that tragedy had once touched this remote place. Standing in the desert silence, Elena would talk to her sister as if Maria could hear her across whatever distance separated them. She'd share news about Amy's school achievements, Michael's promotion at work, their parents' declining health. She'd describe the changing seasons in Phoenix, the city's relentless growth, the ways their old neighborhood had evolved in the years since the Martinez family had driven away for the last time. "I'm still looking," she'd whisper to the wind that carried her words across the vast landscape. "I'll never stop looking." July 2023 brought record-breaking heat to Arizona, with temperatures soaring above 115 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks. Construction crews across the state adjusted their schedules, working in the pre-dawn hours to avoid the dangerous afternoon sun. For Mike Hendricks, foreman of the Desert Vista housing development, the heat was just another challenge in a project that had been plagued by delays and complications from the beginning. Desert Vista represented everything that was changing about Arizona. Wealthy retirees from California and the East Coast were driving demand for luxury homes in previously undeveloped areas, pushing the boundaries of suburban sprawl deeper into the Sonoran Desert. The 200-home development promised resort-style amenities, mountain views, and the kind of privacy that came with distance from Phoenix's urban core. The irony wasn't lost on Hendricks that they were building homes for families seeking escape from the city, in the same general area where a family had vanished while seeking a similar escape 9 years earlier. He'd been working Arizona construction long enough to know the story of the Martinez family, though he'd never connected it to his current job site until the surveyor mentioned it during a coffee break. "Happened just a few miles from here," the surveyor had said, gesturing toward the hills where the family's car had been found. "Never did find those people. Desert keeps its secrets, you know?" Hendricks focused on the technical challenges, rather than the area's tragic history. Desert Vista's premium lots were carved into hillsides that offered panoramic views but required extensive excavation and grading. The rocky soil was hard on equipment, and the remote location meant every delivery of materials required careful planning. The project was 6 months behind schedule and significantly over budget. Tommy Valdez had been operating heavy equipment for 15 years, but he'd never worked ground as challenging as Desert Vista's Phase 2. The excavator's bucket scraped against rock and root with each scoop, progress measured in feet rather than yards. On the morning of July 18, 2023, he was digging the foundation for Lot 47, one of the development's most expensive sites, when his bucket struck something that wasn't geological. The metallic clang rang across the construction site, audible even over the diesel engine's rumble. Valdez shut down the excavator and climbed into the foundation hole to investigate. What he found made him call for Hendricks immediately. "Mike, you need to see this," Valdez said, his voice tight with concern. "And maybe we should call the police?" Hendricks rappelled into the 8-foot-deep foundation hole and saw what had stopped his operator. A section of corrugated metal roofing was partially buried under years of accumulated sediment and debris. The metal wasn't random construction waste. It was arranged deliberately, weighed down with stones and positioned to cover something beneath. Working carefully with hand tools, they uncovered what appeared to be a makeshift shelter. Adobe bricks, probably scavenged from the ruins of old ranch buildings, formed rough walls barely 4 feet high. The metal roof was anchored with heavy stones and stretched canvas. Inside the cramped space, they found the remnants of a desperate attempt at survival. A water-stained sleeping bag lay crumpled in one corner. Rusted cans that had once held food were scattered across the dirt floor. Children's sneakers, faded and worn, sat beside an adult's hiking boots. A small backpack with cartoon characters contained crayons and a coloring book, its pages warped by moisture and time. And beneath the sleeping bag, they found what they'd been dreading. Human remains. 4 sets of them, positioned as if the people had been sleeping when death finally claimed them. Even without forensic training, Hendricks could see this was a family. 2 adults and 2 children. Their bones telling the story of a tragedy that had played out in desperate privacy 9 years earlier. The Yavapai County Sheriff's Office responded within an hour, followed by the medical examiner's team and FBI agents who'd been involved in the original investigation. The construction site became a crime scene, though the crime was nature's cruelty rather than human malice. Detective Sarah Morrison, who'd inherited the Martinez cold case from her retired predecessor, stood at the edge of the foundation hole and felt the weight of 9 years of unanswered questions. The shelter was less than 2 miles from where the family's car had been found, well within the original search perimeter. How had dozens of trained searchers, search dogs, and aerial surveillance missed it? The answer became clear as Morrison studied the site. The shelter occupied a natural depression in the landscape, invisible from above and camouflaged by the metal roof that had weathered to match the surrounding rock. Ground searchers had passed within 200 yards of the shelter on multiple occasions, but the desert's subtle geography had hidden the family's final refuge. The DNA confirmation came 3 weeks later, though everyone involved had known the truth from the moment the shelter was discovered. The remains were those of Carlos Martinez, 36, Maria Martinez, 34, Diego Martinez, 12, and Sofia Martinez, 8. They'd been found exactly 1.7 miles from their abandoned Honda Pilot, in a shelter that had protected them from the desert sun but couldn't save them from its ultimate verdict. Elena had been prepared for this moment for 9 years, but the confirmation still hit her like a physical blow. She'd driven to the construction site as soon as she'd heard about the discovery, arriving before the media crews and curious onlookers. Standing at the edge of the foundation hole, she'd finally understood where her sister's family had spent their final days. Dr. Patricia Vasquez, the Yavapai County medical examiner, reconstructed the family's final days from the evidence found in the shelter. The Martinez family had survived the car accident with minor injuries, but found themselves stranded in 100-degree heat, with no cell phone service and limited supplies. Instead of staying with their vehicle, the standard advice for desert survival, Carlos had made a decision that proved both resourceful and ultimately tragic. The family had discovered the ruins of a failed homestead, Probably built during the 1940s when optimistic settlers had tried to ranch the remote area before drought and isolation drove them away. Carlos had used his military engineering skills to reinforce the collapsing adobe structure, creating a shelter that provided crucial protection from the sun's deadly rays. The family had survived approximately 5 to 7 days after the car accident, according to the medical examiner's analysis. They'd rationed their limited water supply and the snacks from their moving day cooler. Carlos had apparently foraged for edible desert plants, finding prickly pear cactus and other vegetation that provided minimal nutrition and moisture. But it hadn't been enough. The desert's arithmetic was unforgiving. 4 people, including 2 children, needed more water than the arid landscape could provide. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, and eventually organ failure had claimed them one by one. Carlos had died last, his body positioned protectively over his family even in death. In his wallet, investigators found a note written on a napkin from the Chevron station where they'd made their final stop. The ink had faded but was still legible. "If anyone finds this, please know we love our families. Elena, take care of Mom. Tell everyone we tried to make it home. We stayed together. We weren't afraid. Tell Sophia's teacher she would have loved 2nd grade. Tell Diego's friends he was thinking about them. We're gonna sleep now. We stayed together. Carlos." The note was dated September 21st, 2014, 6 days after the family had been reported missing, 3 days after their car had been found. Detective Morrison's investigation revealed the heartbreaking truth about why the family had never been found during the original search. They'd done everything right according to survival manuals, found shelter, conserved resources, and stayed together. But the shelter's location in a natural depression, combined with the weathered metal roof that blended with the landscape, had made it invisible to aerial searches. Ground searchers had passed within 200 yards of the shelter on multiple occasions, following grid patterns that should have revealed any signs of human presence. But the desert's vast scale and subtle geography had hidden the family's refuge, turning their survival instincts into an inadvertent trap. They were survivors, Morrison told Elena during their final meeting about the case. They fought for a week in conditions that would have killed most people in days. Carlos built a shelter that kept them alive longer than should have been possible. In different circumstances, with an earlier rescue, they might have made it. The discovery answered the questions that had haunted Elena for 9 years, but the answers brought their own pain. Her sister's family hadn't abandoned their new life or been victims of foul play. They'd simply encountered the desert's harsh reality while trying to reach the home they'd never see. Henderson Development faced a difficult decision when the Martinez family's remains were discovered on Lot 47. The premium building site, with its panoramic mountain views and proximity to the development's planned clubhouse, was worth nearly $400,000. But building a luxury home on the spot where a family had died felt wrong to everyone involved. After consulting with Elena and community leaders, Henderson Development donated the land for a memorial park. The gesture was both compassionate and practical. The media attention surrounding the discovery had cast a shadow over the entire development, and honoring the Martinez family's memory seemed like the right thing to do. Elena worked with landscape architects to create a memorial that would honor her sister's family while serving the broader community. The design reflected both the desert's harsh beauty and the enduring strength of family bonds. Native plants that bloomed in September, the month of the family's disappearance, created a garden that would provide color and life throughout the year. Palo Verde trees offered shade and golden blooms that Carlos would have recognized from his military training in Arizona. Desert marigolds provided bright yellow flowers that Sophia would have loved. Ghost plants and barrel cacti demonstrated the desert's capacity for both beauty and survival. The plantings required minimal water and maintenance, ensuring the memorial would endure even through the region's inevitable droughts. A bronze plaque near the memorial center bore the family's names and the dates they were lost and found. But the most powerful element was a reproduction of Carlos's final note, etched in granite. "We stayed together. We weren't afraid. Benches carved from local stone provided places for reflection, their simple design echoing the adobe construction of the shelter where the family had spent their final days. A small fountain fed by recirculated water provided the sound of life in the desert silence. The memorial opened on September 15, 2024, exactly 10 years after the Martinez family's disappearance. Elena spoke to a crowd of hundreds, including search volunteers who'd never stopped feeling they'd failed the family, police officers who'd worked the case, and residents of the Desert Vista development who'd chosen to honor rather than ignore their community's tragic history. They weren't lost, Elena said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. They knew exactly where they were going, home to start a new life in Flagstaff. They just took a different path than we expected, and that path led them home to God instead. The memorial drew visitors from across Arizona and beyond. True crime enthusiasts made pilgrimages to the site, but more often, the visitors were families drawn by the simple message of devotion and resilience. Parents brought their children to the memorial garden, using the Martinez family's story to discuss the importance of staying together, making smart choices, and never giving up on the people you love. Elena visits the memorial every Tuesday, the day of the week when construction workers had discovered her sister's family. She brings fresh flowers from her garden and updates on family news, maintaining the one-sided conversations she'd been having for a decade. Sometimes, she reads aloud from Diego's favorite books or sings the lullabies Maria had used to comfort Sofia. The memorial has become a gathering place for Desert Vista's residents, many of whom were drawn to the community by the story of the family who'd never reached their own new home. Children play in the memorial garden while their parents reflect on the fragile nature of plans and dreams. The Martinez family's tragedy has become a reminder to cherish every ordinary moment, to appreciate the simple miracle of arriving safely at your destination. Detective Morrison, now a lieutenant with the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, uses the Martinez case in training sessions for new officers. The family's story illustrates both the challenges of search and rescue operations in the Sonoran Desert and the importance of understanding the landscape's deceptive geography. New search protocols now include systematic examination of any man-made structures, no matter how abandoned or deteriorated. They did everything we teach people to do, Morrison tells her trainees. They found shelter, conserved resources, and stayed together. But the desert is bigger than any human plan, and sometimes doing everything right isn't enough. The case has become a study in how quickly modern life can be stripped away, leaving families to face nature's most basic challenges. The Martinez family's story resonates because it could happen to anyone. A wrong turn, a moment of confusion, a mechanical failure in the wrong place at the wrong time. Elena's own family has found peace in the memorial and the closure it represents. Her daughter Amy, now 20, volunteers as a docent at the memorial on weekends, sharing the story of the aunt and cousins she barely remembers but has learned to love through her mother's devotion. Her husband Michael has found his own way to honor the Martinez family's memory, establishing a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in search and rescue. The Martinez family's story became a watershed moment for search and rescue operations throughout the Southwest. Their improvised shelter, invisible from above but effective at preserving life, highlighted critical gaps in traditional search patterns and led to new protocols that have since helped locate other missing persons in similar circumstances. Desert Vista developed into a thriving community, with many residents drawn by the memorial's message of family devotion and resilience. The development's marketing materials initially avoided mentioning the tragedy, but over time, the memorial became a selling point rather than a liability. Families wanted to live in a place that honored family bonds and understood the importance of staying together. The memorial garden blooms every September. Its flowers a reminder that beauty can emerge from the most tragic circumstances. Visitors often comment on the peaceful atmosphere of the site, noting that it feels more like a celebration of life than a monument to death. Elena's vigil continues, but it has evolved from desperate searching to grateful remembrance. She knows where her sister's family is now, and she knows their story. The questions that tormented her for 9 years have been answered, replaced by the simpler task of keeping their memory alive. On clear desert mornings, when the Arizona sun first touches the memorial garden, Elena sometimes imagines she can hear the sounds of family life carried on the wind. Diego's patient voice explaining chess moves, Sophia's giggle as she colors outside the lines, Maria's gentle humming while she paints, Carlos's satisfied grunt as he fixes something that was broken. The Martinez family's journey to their new home in Flagstaff ended differently than they'd planned. But they did reach their destination. They stayed together, they weren't afraid, and they found their way home at last.